Please welcome General Vincent Stewart.
Thanks for this great opportunity. I know, folks, that this is a difficult subject to talk about. I realize that in the grand scheme of things, folks are probably asking, why in the world do we need to have a discussion about race in the military then and now? We've seen tremendous progress over the last 50 years. There really isn't. So let me reframe this, because I've got a lot of materials that I can present, but what I really want to do is just have you just muted me, so I restart. Let's just talk. The reason I'm here, I think one of the reasons I'm here is because of the op-ed that I penned as a result of the murder of George Floyd. To be able to see an individual go through the agony, begging for his life, and 9 minutes and 45 seconds later, see him in lifeless form, not knowing if he was dead at that point, that really hurt. It was really painful to watch that and to think that in 2020 in our country, something like that could happen. And I knew at that moment that I could not be silent anymore. I've been silent my entire career at the obstacles and things that I saw that were built around racism, and I couldn't be quiet anymore. And writing that op-ed was not courageous, it was painful. It was painful because I, like so many others, joined our military, went to fight for democracy and freedom, and came home and was dealt as a second-class citizen who could not capture all of the things that our Constitution says and our Declaration of Independence said about all men being created equal with justice and liberty for all. And so that was painful for me to recognize that this isn't something new, but something that has gone on throughout the history of our country. And more importantly, the painful part of this conversation or this revelation was not that we had not lived up to the true meaning and spirit of our Constitution, but in spite of what had happened to me, I could not protect my children and my grandchildren from this environment. And I've got 15 grandchildren. I love them all, but I couldn't protect them. And to see the cycle of events occur, it was just very painful. And every person of color could recognize the things that I laid out in my op-ed. And so the question for me then was, okay, so now what? What do we do about this? How do we advance this conversation and make this conversation real? And make this conversation something that results in a different behavior and a different environment for my children, your children, and grandchildren. So one of the things I'll ask you all to do, and I sometimes start the conversation this way, but I'll ask you all, everyone in the audience, and the first part will be to those people, white individuals in our audience. How would you feel if I told you that tomorrow morning when you wake up, you will be a person of color? No, let me modify that. What if I told you that when your son or grandson, age 12 to 24, will wake up tomorrow and be a person of color? Would you encourage your son or grandson to go to bed early? Because tomorrow when you wake up, you're going to be a person of color, and that is really something that I value and I think it's important. And you're going to, and I don't mean, let me be clear, I don't mean that you're going to be Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan or some other famous person of color, but that your son or grandson, age 12 to 24, is going to be just another black dude in the neighborhood. And I throw this out to folks of color in the audience. Would you, if I told you you're going to be white tomorrow, what would your reaction be? Would you go to bed early so that you could wake up early so you could be white, vice versa? And again, the answer to that question isn't that you're a racist. It doesn't mean that you have inherent bias. You may, conscious or unconscious, but the reality is you will think about things very differently if, and maybe it even goes to the answer of what is privilege. Because you get the, immediately when someone says a privilege, they think, okay, that means I'm rich. But it doesn't mean it means that you have some opportunities that someone else of color doesn't have. So I will wake up tomorrow morning, I'll be black. I'll go to bed tomorrow night, I'll be black. I'll die, I'll be black. I don't have the option of changing the color of my skin. And unless you truly are colorblind, you will see the color of my skin and you'll make some judgments. So where are we in the context of race in the military? Gosh, what are you complaining about, I hear? Look at how far you've come. You've had a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell, a person of color. We have the Air Force Chief of Staff as a person. Wait a minute, you had a Commander-in-Chief, President Obama, who was a person of color. So just take a deep breath, relax, it's getting better. But the question is it getting better? The numbers, we used to look at the military as a great place where some of these social issues are resolved because they're an organization based on merit only. You roll your sleeve up, you work hard, you're dependable. We know we can count on you to our left and our right. We don't see color, we see dark green and light green Marines. But the reality is, again, going back to the minute I walk in the door or you walk in the door, there are some judgments made. If you're overweight, there's some judgments made. If you're Hispanic, there's some judgments made. If you're Asian, there's some judgments made. If you are of color, there are judgments made. Now, what do you do with that? What do you do with those judgments that are made? And do those judgments generate action that is imperceptible? And I often use the idea of a 5-mile-an-hour headwind if you're a runner. If you're running into the wind at 5 miles an hour, it's almost imperceptible, but it does impact on your ability to get to the finish line. Conversely, if you have a 5-mile-an-hour tailwind, it does impact how long it takes you to get to the finish line. And so even the simple thing that this person doesn't look like me, doesn't act like me, doesn't talk like me, could result in that 5-mile-an-hour headwind that is imperceptible, but prevents someone from achieving their fullest potential. The reason I chose the title of the op-ed, Take Your Knee Off My Chest, my neck so I can breathe, is because there are a couple things with the knee analogy. If you keep your knee on the neck of those who are desperately trying to survive and trying to achieve, they will not achieve their full potential, nor will they be able to bring their full potential to the organization. But if you lift them up, if you take your knee off the necks and you create opportunities and you create hope and you create a sense of value, then they will do everything they can, not only to survive, but to help you to thrive. Another question I get particularly in our military is, so how does diversity and how does race make me a better warfighting organization? And the answer really is we all have different ideas and approaches to thinking, to acting, to leading. And as we incorporate those different approaches and ideas, we lift each other up and we're better as a result. So there is great value. Now, again, going back to the original. Well, geez, you've done all right. I mean, look at you, General Stewart. You made it. You retired as a 3-star. Clearly, purely on merit. And you know what? I had someone ask a friend or comment to a friend when I became the director of DIA, who said that the only reason I was the director of DIA was because of the color of my skin. Now, having struggled to get to the top, I found it really ironic that now that I got to the top, it was only because I had the color of my skin that I got to the top. I had folks, I used to say, when you get into the positions that I've had, that you have folks who pray, P-R-A-Y, for you, and you have folks who prey on you, P-R-E-Y. And that's been my experience. There are folks who will love to see me be successful, And there are small, and in many cases it's small, group of folks who say, you know what, we're not going to help this person be successful, and we'll do almost anything to be disruptive. Why do I tell you all this? Folks, ladies and gentlemen, it is a frustrating journey. It is a frustrating journey to see young Black men being killed at a rate that exceeds the other demographics. It is still difficult for me to look at even my own service and see very few African Americans at the top of the pyramid. Worse than that, more confounding than that, is the pipeline to get to the top of the pyramid. Just like the National Football League, you have a better chance of being a head coach if you've been an offensive or defensive coordinator. And when you look across the services, in many cases, you're not seeing folks who are in the key positions, in the key jobs that are going to ensure that they get to the 3- and 4-star level. So if you're not positioning people at the 2-star level, your last time you really get a chance to, you get a board selection. If you're not putting people in a position where they can make that hurdle, where they can then be nominated, and if you're not nominating them for the key positions, they have no chance to get to the 4-star level. So if you look across the military, and this pertains primarily to the officer rank, if you don't see people of color as the J3, the operations officer of a joint unit, or the J5, the plans officer of a joint unit, or the J8, the folks who control the money, those demographics tell you who the future leaders are going to be in the joint community and in your organization. So look at, yes, we've done great things. Yes, we've come a long way, but we're not where we need to be. On the enlisted side of the military, yes, we no longer have stewards as the areas that we can put people in. We no longer have stevedores. And on the enlisted side, the numbers and the position looks very good and looks very much like our population. On the officer side, it is not the case. Oftentimes, it is both sides participate in this challenge. Because sometimes not seeing, one of the toughest things for me leaving the military was, if nothing else, I was a vision of hope that, hey, Stewart's picture's on the wall, maybe I can make it. I had someone, as I told him I was going to retire, said to me that, you know, we will not have for another 15 or so years a African-American 3-star who could be competitive to be a 4-star, and really, really tug at me to stay in. Maybe over whiskey, I'll tell you why I left, but it's difficult when you're in the middle of an organization and you look up and you don't see anyone that looks like you, because it means the system hasn't changed significantly, and there are limits to my upward mobility. And oh, by the way, I now have a skill that's marketable on the private sector, so there's no real reason to stick around. We've got to change that if we're going to get the kind of diversity and the kind of inclusion that we desire for our operating forces in the 21st century. And I'll stop there and take any questions. We'll go anywhere you want to go, and I'm not uncomfortable with hard questions.
So as General, as we're waiting for people to, remember, if you have a comment or a question, please let us know in the chat, and we'll get started. And while we're waiting for you to let me know that, I'll be honest with your question there, you know, my answer changed, right? When you asked if myself, what would I think about if I personally woke up a Black man? Personally, I mean, obviously it's a hypothetical, but I think I might be able to handle that. I don't know, but I think I might be able to. But as soon as you mentioned your son, my answer changed. I'll be honest with you, I don't want my son to have to deal with the kind of issues that these young Black children are having to deal with. I'm not prepared to have that conversation with my child that says, look, when you stop, you have to be different. You have to be this much more careful than, say, your classmate. So my perception and my immediate thought was, for me personally, I can do it, but would I wish that on my child? I completely changed my answer when that came about. And so I don't know how the audience feels about that, and I would love to hear from you guys, but personally, that was my first reaction to that.
Yeah, it's, I mean, when you look at that demographic is at high risk. There's so many, it's, when you look at the arrest rate for that demographic, it's higher than any other demographic. You look at the incarceration rate and the term of imprisonment, it's higher. We have about 6% of African Americans in the 17 to 25 year group, but they make up 41% of the prison population. Does that mean they're more inclined to be criminals, or what does it really mean? And so, yeah, I don't know if I would want to start over, but I wrestle with, my children are gone past that stage, but my grandchildren are coming up on that. I'm having a tough time getting to the chat. So if you push the questions to me, that'd be good.
I'm going to push them for you right now. The first question, I'm going to go ahead and ask to unmute Mr. Bryant Neal, and he's going to ask you his question.
Oh, hi. Did you want me to ask myself?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, go for it, Brian. You're going to be a rock star.
Okay, Vincent. Yeah, my question is specifically, what type roles did African Americans play in World War II? I know that it was a lot of sort of servant type jobs during World War I, but had things actually gotten any better by the time World War II rolled around? And I'm actually calling you from Hawaii, and I am aware of the Japanese who were minorities. I hear tell that some of them actually trained on the U.S. mainland in Mississippi. And while and during the training, they were exposed to racism that they'd never ever experienced before, simply because of the fact that they were different. And adding to that then would be where the jobs that they ended up having to do outside of the 442nd any different than the African-American soldiers.
Yeah, so I'm on the board of the Friends of the World War II Memorial. And it's interesting, a beautiful memorial in Washington, D.C. And if you looked at that memorial, you would not find any trace of anything that looks like African Americans contributed to the victory in Europe and the Pacific. There isn't a single thing that suggests that there was contribution. Now, contribution was different. It got better from the Civil War to the First World War to the Second World War. But the Montford Point Marines had to literally be directed to allow African Americans to serve in the Marine Corps, and had to fight their way into operations or training even. But for the most part, it remained largely support role, with very few exceptions where folks had real combat operations, generally not at the officer rank, some in the air component in the Air Force, generally not as NCOs, although there are some rare exceptions. But the history continued the same: limited opportunity, support roles, very, very few combat roles, and certainly no real leadership roles. Brian, did that answer your question? He's probably muted now. That's okay.
All right, we've got a...
Yeah, thank you. That did answer my question, General. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. So now I'm going to go ahead and move over and unmute Mr. Oscar Chavez for you to go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I wanted to ask the general whether there is any difference in the different armed services. Maybe not so much now as in the process of desegregating the armed forces, where the services did this differently.
Yeah, I don't know a good way to answer that question because I haven't spent enough time looking at the different services. But if I were just a really snap judgment, I would say that I think I see more effort on the Army side than most of the other service, only because their numbers look, now I don't know if this is just organic or if they really have a program, but their numbers look better than the other services. I won't say which one is trails in the numbers, but there's one service that does trail. We're probably in the Marine Corps about in the middle of the pack. And again, we like to think that if you perform, someone once told me, we discriminate in the Marine Corps. If you perform, we love you. If you don't perform, we don't like you. And that's the level of discrimination is about performance. But I'd say in terms of the numbers, just a snapshot, the Army and the Air Force looks like a little bit better numbers. And the Marine Corps is about in the middle of the pack, and maybe you can figure out who's last then.
Excellent. Thank you, Oscar, for asking that question. Now we're going to move on to Mr. Travis. I'm sorry, I'm going to ruin your name there, but I apologize. Travis Petzold.
Thank you. Petzold was good. Good afternoon, General, and thank you for being here. And it's interesting that you let in with that because I'm Captain Travis Petzold, United States Navy. So, you know, and I'm currently the professor of naval science at UC Berkeley. And one of the things we are actively discussing amongst the PNSs, certainly brought on by recent events, you know, has opened up the conversation is how do we do better with representation in the officer corps, specifically intaking officers into the officer corps. And of course, now we're having the discussion about standards, you know, and how we select those people. And how we select scholarship people is awfully similar to how colleges select their people. It's relying on things like SATs and high school GPAs. And we probably have all read a number of things that have shown that there are disparities, demographic disparities, in how various groups do with those things. And of course, now we're having the argument, well, why are those things the case, et cetera. And I was curious as to your thoughts or insights, you know, if you were king or general for a day, what would you seek to do to help improve some of this issue that we're having in our military?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. One is, as you point out, these aptitude tests are skewed in some way and really doesn't, you know, if you took my aptitude test coming out of high school or my grades coming out of high school, you would have predicted that I was going to be a failure as going forward. It wasn't a really good measure because I don't test well. And so, and I don't know what the answer to that is, but if we're making some of these really hardcore selection decisions, using a system that we know does not adequately capture potential, then we're doing something flawed and we've got to come up with a different system. Second thing is, oftentimes we think in order to get enough diversity at the top of the pyramid, we need to expand the base. So if we had 100 people last year and we only had one at the top, let's do 200 next year and 400 and we'll have 2 and 4. I'm not so sure. I think that may well be part of the answer is how we recruit a broader base. But more important to me is how do we retain those who are in the middle of our organization, who don't feel valued and don't feel welcome and don't feel there's an opportunity. It is stunning to me that I just had an interaction with a young officer and he was leaving the Marine Corps. And I said, what would it have taken to keep you in the Marine Corps? And it was silence because no one had ever asked him that question. Now, if you're in the middle of your organization and you don't feel valued and you don't feel that there's a future for you, you're probably not going to go out recruiting someone in your network. However, if you feel that you're valued, that you have a role, that there's a future, there's an opportunity, guess who your best recruiters will be? And oftentimes we spend more time looking at how we recruit more and not enough time on how we retain the very best within our organization. we just make the assumption that Johnny's going to stick around. He's at the 10-year mark, and it's so important for him to make 20 that he's going to do 10 years of standing on his head. Well, that's not the case. He has opportunities out there. I cannot begin to tell you how many folks have reached out to me since the George Floyd's death, going, hey, can you recommend a person of color? They don't always say that, but that's what they're looking for me, because all of a sudden people of color become a commodity, a bad term, horrible term. So this morning I talked to an individual who is leaving his company, and he will be the 5th person of color to leave his company to go elsewhere because they're targeted recruiting as good managers, good leaders, and they happen to fit let's be more diverse. Now, it says great things about the 5 who are thought highly of. What does it say about the company that they're leaving? What does it mean when the company loses 5 people? Does it say that the company values them and has a plan for them to get to the C-suite, or something else, and no one knows? So the important thing, I think, is, yes, you got to grow the base. Yes, you got to select. And the question I often get is, do we need affirmative action? Do we need quotas? We need a guiding star that says we want to create an environment that allows us to get to a upper level of our organization that reflects the demographics, and not just the nation, but the customers we serve. And if we are just one overwhelming demographic, we will not be the very best, and we will not serve the customers that we have. That was a long answer to a very interesting question.
Well, thank you very much, General. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Ms. Sorry, let's see. I'm looking here. Now we're going to hear from Joe Brisbane. Let me just unmute you right here, and then you're good to go to ask your question.
Oh, hi. I was attracted to this symposium because my father was in the Pacific Theater. I'm Caucasian, but I had been intrigued by a story of a Black artist who also served in the Pacific Theater in World War II. And so I found research very limited, very difficult to find for the soldier, and the Black soldier particularly, in the Pacific Theater. And I did find things, but I feel that's a way people's minds are changed, even if it's back in World War II and forward, to continue to tell the stories. We seem to get the story of World War II only about Tuskegee Airmen. So my question is, maybe I'm answering my own question, but don't you think they got short shrift, Black soldiers in that Pacific Theater? I knew nothing of their service growing up.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
There has not been, Joe, a value placed on telling the complete history. And we see that under even greater pressure now. But if, to borrow from George Santana, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. There's significant, here's where I think I'm going to go with trying to do some research, and I mentioned this to some folks earlier. How many African Americans got the Navy Cross where their valor and their actions on the battlefield would have been worthy of a Medal of Honor, which they would have gotten if they were Caucasian? And you can work this all the way down. Got the Silver Star instead of the Navy Cross, got the Bronze Star instead of the Silver Star, because there was no currency, as in a value, to saying that an African American could and would fight and could and would die for his country on the battlefield, because that was the sentiment at the time. African Americans won't fight. They won't contribute. But history shows that they fought not just on the battlefield, but they fought to get to the battlefield. They fought to be a part of organizations that would fight for democracy and freedom, because they believed that as a result of fighting for democracy and freedom, they would come home and live that life of liberty and freedom and justice, and they would be fully embraced as citizens of our country. The reality is history suggests that that has not been the case. And so there's no currency, there's no value to exploring the history as a history historian. I claim to be a historian. If you don't tell the complete history, then you are distorted in your judgments about people and events. So I would love, I challenge anybody out there, the 35 members out there who want to, it's so difficult to pull that history because you don't have the artifacts. There is no, there are very limited records because it just wasn't valued. And so if you really want to write something, you better hurry, because the men and women who served in World War II are now dying at an alarming rate, and they know the history. And so it is difficult to put together a history because there just wasn't any value, perceived value in doing so. So Joe, I don't know how we get there. We're certainly running out of time. There are not a whole lot of artifacts on the record, but I think one of the places that we can find artifacts is in the level of awards that African Americans received in combat.
That is interesting. I'll be honest, from our museum stance, you know, we are trying to do a better job of adding more diversity to our collection. But in regards to what General Stewart just said, we do find it difficult to find. We have the stories. We have some of the stories, obviously not all representative, but the artifacts and a lot of those individual stories were not recorded. We don't have them. He's right. So it does make it a little bit more difficult to do that. So thank you for answering that. I'm going to go now to Mr. Joseph Vargo. I'm going to go ahead, and this is actually a pretty nice follow-up to what you just talked about, General.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Joe, we got you.
General, thank you for your service. I wanted to know if you could relate the story of Doris Miller, his heroism at Pearl Harbor. And he's one of the guys who got a Navy Cross, who I believe should have gotten a Medal of Honor for what he did. And are there any efforts ongoing to elevate his Navy Cross to a Medal of Honor?
I don't know of any effort to elevate. I know that we just had a Marine Sergeant Major whose Navy Cross got elevated to a Medal of Honor, and forgive me, I just dropped his name. There seems to be increasing effort to correct the wrong of actions, heroic actions for a Caucasian has resulted in higher awards than it has for minorities in general. So I've seen a couple of cases now where folks are trying to elevate Navy Cross to Medal of Honor. That is a difficult journey. Again, interesting stories, but generally folks want written artifacts that support the stories. But Dory Miller in the story was very heroic on December 7th, 41. And the level of heroism required a good bit of hard work to get him to a Navy Cross. And I suspect it will be very difficult to get enough momentum, impetus artifacts to elevate him to a Medal of Honor. There's some things that we probably can do for Vietnam and Korea because there's still enough people around, but I suspect if we go back to World War II, it'll be very hard for Dory Miller.
Thank you. Just a time check here. We do have about 10 more minutes, so we're clearly not going to get to everyone's comments and questions, but thank you guys. These have been great. So right now I'm going to hand it over and go ahead and get Mr. Eli Tanditer to go ahead and ask his question.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, sir.
Hi. So yeah, the conundrum here is that if you impose quotas or you go ahead with, say, affirmative action, so in order to increase the number of representation of minorities, then this is seen by other people that, oh, well, then we're not using a merit criteria to advance these people. On the other hand, you have this entrenched resistance to change, right, by racist people in certain positions. So it's, I don't know, I mean, if you care to comment how to break this lockdown, right? Because how do we move on?
Yeah, no one that I've talked to, and I certainly over the last several months, I've talked to a lot of folks. No one wants quotas or affirmative action. Not everybody believes that the merit system allows the progression. What we want is just to be fair and balanced and create opportunities. No one values quotas. It sets each side against each other because it denies opportunities for one by creating opportunities for others. What we want is a conversation that says we are valued. My next article, op-ed, will probably be titled something like, "Are we still 3/5 of a person?" If we're 3/5 of a person, then our life is not as valuable as others. If we're 3/5 of a person, our opportunities will not be the same. If we're 3/5 of, and I could go down the list. If we're fully embraced as a person, equal to, based on our character, based on our work ethics, based on you create opportunities and I'm successful. If I can have those things, I will add value to your organization. And I don't have to be, I need one of those or 10 of these, or because it will, like I said, it will create incredible friction and tension in an organization. All we want, most African Americans, people of color want, is to not feel that 5-mile-an-hour headwind, to have opportunities to succeed, to have training opportunities to succeed, to have job opportunities so we can succeed, and not feel that we are 3/5 of a person. And I'll stop there, Eli.
Perfect, sorry. We do have time for one more question, so I'm going to unmute Mr. Thomas Lightsey for your question.
Good afternoon, General. When I looked into signing up for this session, I was happy to see, number one, that you're a Marine and a Black man. And when I saw that you were a 3-star general, I said, holy cow, this guy must be pretty sharp, because we don't have very many 3-star generals in the Marine Corps.
I hope nothing I said changed your opinion on me being really smart. So.
No, sir. This has been great. And one of the things at the end of this, I'm going to be able to say to my peers and my folks in the community who are also having this discussion, is that I talked to a Black man about this, because it's just not that easy for me to do. I live in New Mexico, and we don't have a lot of Black guys out here. But fortunately, my next door neighbor is a Black man, and he served 2 years in the Army. He's 60 years old, and he still wears his Army t-shirt. So the military can have a huge impact on all of us. And it certainly did for me. When I started out, I too was a tanker in the Marines, and my platoon sergeant was Black. And he taught me what I needed to know to be successful. This was in the 70s, and he was a high school dropout. But I love that man because he took care of me and taught me. And so education, I think, is such a huge piece of moving us forward. And I'd like to get your thoughts on education, the role education plays in general, and especially how it can help move people forward in the military. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Now, 2 things. One, you reminded me of my platoon sergeant, then Gunnery Sergeant Dallas Lloyd. And a Caucasian reached out to me when I joined the platoon. He shook my hand and he said, Lieutenant, if anybody ever tells you that our platoon is effed up, It's because I failed to train you and I failed to train the platoon. I remembered that experience for 30 some years now. Here's a guy who was invested in me from day one and taught me more about leadership and about training. And I only had him for probably 7 months before he got promoted to first sergeant, and I lost him. But he was all about fundamentals. How do you be a good tanker? What are the steps that take you from jumping on the tank to qualifying your tank and your tank platoon? So then it goes back to your question about training and education. Most of what our capacity to learn is shaped in the first 5 to 7 years of our life. Oftentimes we think that this is shaped by going to high school or by going to college. If you're not reading and are comfortable and enjoy reading by age 5, you're probably not going to be comfortable and enjoy reading at age 5. So we're starting way too late. We're starting with those who are disadvantaged at too late a stage. We're going to school because they're in a terrible neighborhood and they're not getting a good breakfast. You can't learn if your brain isn't fed. So how do we roll this education back to the fundamentals? How do we make sure schools have breakfast for those families who can't feed their children? How do we get them early enough in the school system so that their capacity to learn between by age 5 and 7 is as heightened as humanly possible? My grandchildren live in Fairfax County. Every one of those schools the students were issued a Chromebook and a hot point so that they could get onto the system regardless of where they are. There are many cities and counties where that's not the case. So if we're going to be successful in the 21st century, how do we make sure that the education begins with basic blocking and tackling? And if we're not doing that by age 7, we've lost a whole generation of folks, which is one of the reasons I really am worried about, not being able to get back to school, because it puts a whole group of folks in a year or so behind. So you got to start earlier. You got to make a commitment to the disadvantaged communities, and all of us can do a little bit of that. We can go buy a computer for somebody. Okay, exhausting questions. These are hard questions, folks.
Unfortunately, that was going to be our last question. I thank everyone that participated. They were some fantastic questions. Thank you, General Stewart, for taking the time to answer these. And then General Stewart, I'm going to let you have the last word before we leave this meeting. But thank you, everyone, for this.
We're all in this together. This is not a us versus them problem. The thing that I continue to harp on is I am an immigrant to this country. This is the greatest country. My success could not have happened anywhere else. I just want to create opportunities for others to enjoy the success that I've had because we have a country where there are challenges, there are great opportunities, and nowhere else, as I said, could my success have occurred on the face of the earth but here in the United States. So thank you all, and really enjoyed the question, and God bless.
Again, thank you. Thank everyone. Sir, thank you for your past service and your continued service to our country.